My name is Harper Ellison. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a geriatric physician in Asheville, North Carolina. If you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, if you've ever felt invisible in the place where you should have mattered most, then you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. And before I begin, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story. Somewhere out there, someone else is sitting alone with a phone call that changes everything. Maybe they need to hear they're not alone. That night, December 21st, the cold outside clung to me like a second coat. I had just stepped through the door of my one-bedroom apartment after a 14-hour hospital shift. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic from the hand sanitizer I carried everywhere. My toes ached from being trapped all day in clogs, but I was smiling anyway, half from exhaustion, half from the anticipation of Christmas. By the door sat my green suitcase, already zipped, with a bright red scarf draped across it. Next to it was a stack of carefully wrapped presents, a scented candle for Mom, a leather wallet for Dad, a tripod Derek had been hinting at for weeks, though I doubted he'd remember who gave it. On the counter cooled a pan of apple cinnamon bread pudding, the same dessert I baked every year. No one ever asked who made it. They just devoured it like magic. I was reaching to turn on the small tree in the corner when my phone buzzed. Derek Ellison. The name glowed across the screen. My younger brother. The golden boy. For a moment I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe he needed me to grab napkins or help with rides like I always did. I pressed answer, trying to keep the smile in my voice. "Hey, Derek. What's up?" But his tone was different this time. Light, rehearsed, almost fake. "Hey, Harp, listen. Sienna's coming to Christmas this year." He paused as though weighing every word. "You know how she's really sensitive to energy. And with you working at the hospital all the time, being around sickness and heavy stuff, I think it might be better if you sat this one out, just for her sake." I froze where I stood, hand resting on the switch for the tree lights. The room, moments ago cozy, now felt sterile and cold. "Excuse me?" My voice cracked just slightly, but I forced it even. "It's nothing personal," Derek rushed in, like that phrase could erase the knife he'd already slipped under my ribs. "You know Sienna. She needs calm, positive vibes. You're intense, Harper. She picks up on that." I bit down hard, tasting bitterness on my tongue. Not personal? He was telling me not to come home for Christmas because my very existence was inconvenient. "Fine," I said finally, the word like ash in my mouth. "If that's what you want." Silence hummed between us, thick and sour. Then he muttered something about catching up later, and hung up. I didn't even have time to process before the phone lit again. "Mom." Her voice, soft and falsely sweet, flowed through the line. "Hi, honey. I know Derek just talked to you. We're just trying to make things easy for everyone. You know how Sienna is. If you come, it might cause confusion. Honestly, if you show up, we might not even answer the door." I felt the words punch through my chest one by one. Not even answer the door. The same door I'd walked through countless times carrying groceries, checks, or a quick dinner on nights they didn't feel like cooking. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why the daughter who kept their lights on, who fixed their emergencies, was suddenly too heavy to carry into a family celebration. Instead, I stared at the blinking tree, my hands trembling but my voice flat. "Got it," I whispered. "Merry Christmas." I hung up before she could lace her barbed wire in more silk. The apartment was silent except for the radiator clicking in the corner. My gaze drifted to the gifts stacked by the door, each bow tied with a care no one would notice. The bread pudding cooling on the counter smelled of cinnamon and childhood, but for the first time in years, it felt hollow. I stood there, phone still warm in my hand, as the realization bled through me. I wasn't just unwanted this year, I was unwelcome. For years I had told myself love meant sacrifice, that if I kept giving, kept being dependable, one day they'd look at me and see more than scaffolding. But that night, staring at my little tree and the unopened gifts beneath it, I knew the truth. Love shouldn't sound like an eviction wrapped in pleasantries. Family shouldn't tell you not to bother knocking. The first flakes of snow began to fall outside, drifting past the window. They looked peaceful, almost holy, and yet inside me something cracked wide open. I picked up the phone again, not to call them back, but to scroll through my banking app. For the first time, a thought took shape. Not fully, not yet, but dangerous enough to stir my blood. What if I stopped being their safety net? What if I stopped paying for love that never came? The idea pulsed through me like a warning and a promise. I didn't move on it yet, but it was there. An ember waiting. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, I wrapped my arms around myself, the phone pressed to my chest, and in that silence, the story that would unravel my family had already begun. The snow was still falling outside when I finally set the phone down. My apartment hummed with that empty quiet you can almost hear pressing against your ribs. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the pile of gifts like they were evidence of some naive crime, proof of how badly I'd wanted to belong. Then something inside me snapped into focus. If they didn't want me at Christmas, fine. But if they thought I would just shrink back into silence again, they didn't know me as well as they believed. I pulled a chair to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The screen lit my tired face in the reflection of the dark window. My hands moved almost automatically, logging into my online banking. Years of transactions spilled across the screen. Line after line of money I'd wired, debts I'd covered, crises I'd solved before anyone else even noticed. At first, I just scrolled, aimless, the way you poke at a bruise to see if it still hurts. Then I opened a new document and started typing. Mortgage, $4,200. Truck repairs, $1,600. Physical therapy copay, $1,100. Brandon's camera equipment, $2,300. Flight to New York, $650. The list grew longer and longer, black ink on white screens spelling out the invisible scaffolding of my entire family. My throat tightened as I read the totals. How many hours had I worked to pay for things they never even thanked me for? How many nights had I traded sleep for double shifts so Derek could chase another dream, so Mom could get treatment, so Dad could keep driving his truck? I pushed the chair back suddenly, pacing the small kitchen. The radiator hissed like it agreed with me. I thought about calling Aunt Margaret, the only one in our family who ever remembered my birthday with a handwritten note. But it was late, and besides, I didn't want comfort. Not now. What I wanted was clarity. I went to the closet, dug out an old leather folder I used for patient case studies, and slid the printed sheets inside. As the printer whirred, spitting out page after page of transactions, the sound filled the apartment like a drumbeat. With every page that landed, I felt lighter. I wasn't going to text them an explanation. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at the table. I was going to show up and lay down the truth in front of every smug smile, every guest who thought they knew who Harper Ellison was. I could almost see it. The way their faces would change when they realized how much of their comfort was built on my exhaustion. I didn't crave revenge, not exactly. What I wanted was for them to see me, even if it meant ripping away the curtain they hid behind. I set the folder on the counter beside the gifts. For a second, I considered throwing the presents out, but I couldn't. They weren't just ribbons and paper, they were proof that I had tried. Proof that I had loved them, even when they hadn't loved me back. Leaning against the counter, I whispered to myself, "No more invisible. Not this time." The clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the snow was still falling, blanketing the city in silence. But inside me, a storm had begun. This wasn't going to be another holiday I swallowed in quiet. This time I would drive to Charlotte, walk through that door, and show them exactly who I was, and what I'd done for them. And for once, they would have no choice but to face me. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the roads from Asheville to Charlotte were glazed with a thin layer of frost. I drove carefully, hands tight on the steering wheel, my leather folder resting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. The radio hummed with cheerful carols, voices singing about peace and joy, each lyric cutting like glass. As I pulled into my parents' neighborhood, the houses glowed with strings of lights, inflatable Santas grinning from manicured lawns, Every porch seemed to promise warmth, except I knew that behind one particular door, the warmth was selective, conditional. I parked at the curb and sat there for a moment, staring at the Ellison house. The windows spilled golden light onto the snow, laughter floated faintly through the glass. My father's truck gleamed in the driveway, freshly washed, as if to present the image of a family that had it all together. I whispered to myself, "Breathe, Harper. You're not here to beg. You're here to be seen." I stepped out, boots crunching against the frozen driveway, and walked to the front door. My reflection wavered in the wreath's shiny red ornaments. For a heartbeat, I almost turned back. Then I lifted my hand and knocked. The laughter inside dulled. After a pause, the door opened. It was Derek, still in his easy smile, dressed like he'd stepped out of an ad for cozy holiday charm. Plaid shirt, sleeves rolled, wine glass in hand. The smile faltered the instant he saw me. "Harper?" His voice pitched higher, tight with disbelief. "What are you—" "Showing up," I said flatly, "like family does on Christmas." Behind him, the room grew quiet. Guests holding drinks shifted uncomfortably, their cheerful chatter dissolving into whispers. My mother appeared at his shoulder, face stretched into that brittle smile she wore whenever control slipped. "Sweetheart," she murmured, her tone syrupy but her eyes sharp. We didn't expect you." "No," I replied, stepping over the threshold before she could stop me. "You told me not to come." "Not to. Big difference." Gasps fluttered among the guests, some glancing at one another, unsure whether to stay or make polite excuses to leave. My father emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his jaw tight. "What's going on here?" he demanded. His voice, low and commanding, once used to silence us as kids, carried across the room. I let the silence sit heavy, let them all feel the weight of it. The Christmas tree sparkled behind them, ornaments reflecting tiny fractured versions of my face. For years, I'd stood in the shadows of that tree, useful but unseen. Tonight, I was going to change that. "I'm here," I said, voice steady, "because I'm done being erased." Derek tried to laugh, awkward, as if he could brush it all off. "Come on, Harper. Don't make this weird in front of everyone." But I cut him off, my hand tightening on the folder under my arm. "Weird? Derek, do you think it's normal to tell your sister she's not welcome in her own parents' home because her job makes her too heavy? Do you think it's normal for a family to slam the door on the one person who's been paying their bills in silence for years?" A ripple went through the room. My father's face darkened. My mother's smile cracked. "Not here," she hissed, low but sharp enough for me to hear. "This isn't the place." "Exactly," I snapped back. "This is the place. Right here, right now, with every witness who thinks this house is built on love. Let them see what it's really built on." The room stilled. Even the background carol playlist seemed to hush. Guests who moments ago were laughing over cocktails now stood frozen, eyes darting between me and my family like they'd stumbled into a play with no script. My brother's glass trembled slightly in his hand. He set it down, jaw tight, but he had no words. I stepped fully into the room, unzipping my coat, snowflakes melting down my sleeves. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to tell the truth, and you're all going to hear it." The folder in my arms felt heavy, almost alive. Inside it was the story they'd never dared to admit, the story of me. As I looked around at the stunned faces, I felt my heartbeat settle into a rhythm, firm and unshaken. I had crossed the threshold. There was no going back. The silence inside the living room stretched so tight, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The Christmas lights blinked lazily, mocking the way my family's smiles had frozen midair. I set the folder down on the coffee table with a thud that echoed louder than it should have. Every eye flicked to it. The guests, my parents, Derek. They looked at the leather cover like it might explode. "This," I said, sliding the folder open, "is what you've all been pretending not to see." "Harper, don't," Mom whispered, her voice sugar-sweet, brittle as spun glass. "Don't what?" I snapped. "Don't ruin the illusion? Don't embarrass you in front of your friends?" I flipped the first page, the crisp sound like a blade slicing through the room. I held it up so the nearest guests could read the bold numbers. Mortgage payment, $4,200, paid by me, not by Thomas or Elaine Ellison. The only reason this house still stands is because I covered the bank when you couldn't. Gasps rippled around the room. Dad's face flushed crimson. He barked, "That's private family business." I met his eyes, steady. Exactly. Family business. The kind where one member carries the weight while the rest pretend it doesn't exist. I flipped to the next sheet. Truck repairs, $1,600, paid by me. Physical therapy copays, $1,100 for Mom, paid by me. New camera equipment, $2,300 for Derek's little art project that lasted, 6 months? Stop it! Derek hissed, stepping forward, but his voice cracked. "No," I said, my voice sharper now. "You stop. Stop pretending you built this life on talent and luck. You built it on me. Every time you failed, I picked up the pieces, and every time I succeeded, you ignored it like it never happened." The guests shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others wide-eyed with shock. I could feel their curiosity sharpening, cutting through the perfect holiday facade. One older neighbor finally whispered, "Is that true?" Mom's face tightened, her fake smile faltering. "She's exaggerating. Harper has always been dramatic." "Dramatic?" My laugh came out sharp, humorless. I pulled out another page, holding it high. "Plane ticket for Derek, Thanksgiving 2019, $650. He told you he bought it himself?" "No, I did. While I was pulling double shifts to cover medical bills you didn't even thank me for." Derek's jaw worked, but no words came. He looked like a child caught red-handed, and for once there was no easy joke to hide behind. My father stepped forward, voice booming. "Enough! You don't air dirty laundry in front of company." I turned to him, my own voice steady but shaking with years of swallowed fury. "I'm not airing dirty laundry. I'm telling the truth you've all tried to bury, and I'm doing it here, where you can't twist it behind closed doors." I spread the papers across the table, page after page, until the polished wood was buried under black and white proof of my sacrifices. It looked almost obscene, like a crime scene laid out in receipts. The weight of years pressed down on me, but for the first time it wasn't crushing, it was clarifying. "Do you know what it feels like?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost breaking. "To spend your entire life trying to be enough, only to be told not to bother showing up? To knock on a door you've kept standing and hear your own mother say she won't open it?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Derek finally muttered, "Harper, please, this isn't fair." "Fair?" I turned on him. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You got balloons for dropping out of college. I got silence for graduating medical school. You got applause for participation ribbons. I got dismissed for straight A's. And now you get Christmas. I get locked out." His face crumpled, shame and anger warring behind his eyes. I straightened, scanning the stunned faces around the room. "I didn't come here to ruin Christmas. I came here because I'm done pretending. You wanted me invisible. Tonight, I refuse." My mother finally snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "How dare you come into this house and humiliate us in front of our friends?" I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "How dare you build your lives on my silence and then punish me for speaking?" No one moved. No one spoke. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to pop softer, as if afraid to intrude. I gathered the last page, slapped it onto the pile, and let the papers fan across the table. "That's the truth. Do with it what you want. But don't you ever tell me again that I don't belong here." For a long moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, ragged but steady. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, a mechanical beeping began. A sound that would turn the evening from confrontation to chaos. The sharp beeping that had cut through the silence didn't belong to the fireplace or the oven. It came from outside, muffled but distinct, a heavy, mechanical sound accompanied by the low rumble of a truck. Derek's head jerked toward the window. His face went pale. No, 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 no. He pushed past me, nearly tripping over the corner of the rug, and yanked the curtain aside. The reflection of flashing amber lights lit his cheeks. A tow truck idled at the curb, chains clanking in the cold night air, and strapped to its winch, Derek's beloved Jeep. The room erupted. Guests gasped and shuffled toward the window, whispering. My father barked, "What the hell is going on?" My mother's hand flew to her chest like she'd been stabbed. Derek bolted for the front door, flinging it open so fast the wreath rattled against the wood. "Hey, stop! That's my car!" His voice cracked, desperate, as he stumbled onto the icy steps. I stayed where I was, arms folded, the folder of receipts still spread like evidence across the coffee table. "It's not your car," I said evenly. "Not anymore. The payments were mine. And I stopped making them." My words sliced through the chatter, pulling every gaze back to me. Outside, Derek's pleas grew more frantic. "You can't take it! I'll figure something out! Just give me a few days!" The tow truck driver, unmoved, hooked the Jeep securely. "Sorry, buddy. Bank says it's not yours anymore." His voice carried blunt finality, the kind Derek had probably never heard directed at him before. When Derek stormed back inside, his face was twisted with fury, his cheeks red not just from the cold. "You did this!" He pointed at me, trembling, like he'd found the villain in his story. "Yes," I said, calm but unwavering. "Because I'm done being your personal bailout fund." "You're ruining my life!" His voice cracked high, childlike, in front of everyone. "Do you even realize what you've done?" "I realize exactly what I've done." I leaned forward, my voice low and firm. "I stopped pretending you could survive without me. You wanted me invisible, Derek. Well, invisibility means no more checks, no more rescues, no more saving you from yourself." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the guests seemed to shrink back, unsure where to look. Then, as if on cue, my father's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and his face drained of color. "Overdue notice," he muttered, almost to himself. He scrolled, his lips tightening. "Mortgage is past due. Final warning before foreclosure." The room spun with murmurs. Mom's fingers clutched at his arm. "Thomas, say it isn't—" "It's right here," he snapped, holding the phone out like it had betrayed him. "We were supposed to have a cushion. What happened to the emergency fund?" I met his eyes. "Locked. The cushion was me, and I'm done cushioning." The weight of those words hit like thunder. Mom's face crumpled, her perfect facade slipping. She turned to me with trembling lips. "How could you do this to us?" My laughter burst sharp, bitter. "To you? For years I kept you from drowning, and you called me too serious, too heavy. You wanted me erased, and now you finally get what that looks like." The guests whispered furiously now, their holiday cheer curdling into discomfort. One neighbor nudged her husband toward the door, clearly eager to escape the spectacle. Another sipped wine too quickly, eyes darting between us like watching a train wreck. Derek's voice rose again, desperate and raw. "You're punishing us, just because you feel left out." "Left out?" I cut him off, my anger finally rising like a tide. "I wasn't left out, Derek. I was pushed out. You told me not to come, and Mom threatened not to open the door. You made it clear I was unwanted. Well, here's what unwanted really feels like. No more car, no more safety net, no more money funneled into your black hole of entitlement." My father slammed his fist against the table, rattling the glasses. "You're making a scene!" I stared at him, heat thrumming in my chest, but my voice steady. "No, Dad, you made the scene. I'm just turning on the lights." For a moment, no one moved. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but they were tears of humiliation, not remorse. Derek's fists clenched at his sides. My father looked ready to explode, but had no words that could bridge the reality spread across that table. The sound of the tow truck rumbling away outside was the punctuation mark to my declaration. It was real. It was irreversible. I took a breath, feeling the silence settle heavy and sharp. This is what happens when the scaffolding steps away. The house doesn't stand. No one argued. Not anymore. The glow of the Christmas lights flickered weakly, their cheer paling against the wreckage unraveling in front of them, and in that charged stillness, I felt something unexpected, a sliver of freedom curling warm in my chest. The night wasn't over, but the illusion of their control was. The sound of the tow truck faded into the distance, leaving only the clink of ice melting in abandoned glasses. Derek's fists were still balled at his sides, his chest heaving like he wanted to scream but couldn't find words that would land. My father stood rigid, gripping his phone as if it might suddenly rewrite the numbers on the screen, and then from near the mantel, a quiet voice cut through the tension. Enough. Every head turned. Sienna stood there, her wine glass forgotten on the side table. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the alcohol, but from something sharper, indignation. She looked nothing like the delicate girl they had painted to me in that phone call. She looked steady, like someone who'd been holding her tongue too long. "Excuse me?" my mother asked, her tone clipped, defensive. Sienna took a step forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a metronome. She turned to Elaine and Thomas, then to Derek, her eyes sweeping over them before settling on me. "I need to say this. Right here. Right now." Derek's voice wavered, pleading. "Sienna, don't. This isn't your fight." "It is," she cut him off firmly, "because you dragged me into it." The room froze again, but this time it wasn't because of me. She gestured toward me, her hands trembling only slightly. "You told me Harper was too heavy, that her presence would ruin Christmas, that I'd be overwhelmed by her so-called negativity. But you never told me the truth, that she's the reason this family is still standing." A ripple of whispers moved through the guests. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. Sienna's voice grew stronger. "Do you know how I first heard her name?" "From my grandmother. She couldn't stop talking about the doctor who sat by her bedside when no one else did, who treated her like she wasn't invisible. Harper Ellison saved her life. And you," she turned back to Derek and his parents, eyes blazing, "you dared to treat her like she was disposable?" My mother's lips parted, stunned. My father tried to speak, but no sound came. Derek looked like he'd been slapped. "Sienna, you don't understand." "I understand enough," she snapped. Her voice trembled now, but it only made it more powerful. "I understand that you built your comfort on her sacrifice. I understand that every story you told me about being self-made, about struggling to make it as an artist, was built on lies she paid for." The guests didn't even bother to hide their reactions anymore. One woman near the piano muttered, "Oh my God," while another shook her head in disgust. I wanted to speak, to thank Sienna, but my throat tightened. For years, my words had dissolved in silence. Hearing someone else, someone from outside the family, say them out loud was almost too much to take in. Sienna stepped closer to me, lowering her voice slightly, though everyone could still hear. "Harper, I'm sorry. I didn't know. If I had, I never would have let them drag me into their cruelty. You deserve better than this." Her words cracked something open in me. My eyes stung, though I forced myself not to cry here, not in front of them. But the knot in my chest loosened for the first time in years. Elaine's voice pitched high, shrill. "You don't know our family. You don't understand." "No," Sienna interrupted, calm but fierce. "I understand exactly what kind of family this is. The kind that silences the one who sacrifices the most. The kind that mistakes exploitation for love." Derek's face twisted, shame flickering, then anger. "Sienna, stop embarrassing me." "You embarrassed yourself," she shot back. That was the final blow. The room tilted, the golden glow of the Christmas lights suddenly harsh against faces, flushed with humiliation. Sienna turned, grabbed her coat from the back of a chair, and slipped it on with deliberate calm. She looked at me once more, her eyes softening. "You don't have to keep standing alone anymore." Then she left, the front door closing behind her with a sound that felt less like an exit and more like a gavel striking. The silence she left behind was deafening. My parents and brother stood rooted, but their power had cracked. The witnesses had heard, the illusion was gone. And for the first time that night, I wasn't the only voice telling the truth. The door clicked shut behind Sienna, her absence echoing louder than her words. The guests shuffled uneasily, caught between their coats on the hooks and the drama unraveling before them. Some stayed, wide-eyed, hungry for spectacle. Others lingered by the exit, but hadn't found a polite excuse to flee yet. That was when my mother's mask cracked. Elaine's voice sliced through the air, sharp enough to make a few people flinch. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," she spat, her usual syrupy tone stripped away. "That girl barely knows this family, and she thinks she can lecture us in our own home? How dare she?" Her eyes snapped to me, blazing. "And you brought her into this. Don't act like you're innocent. You've always had a flair for dramatics, Harper. Twisting things, making yourself the victim so everyone claps for you." I swallowed hard, steadying my breath. "I didn't bring her into anything. She spoke because she saw the truth. You just didn't expect anyone else to notice." Dad stepped forward now, his voice booming like a gavel. "You listen to me. This ends here. You will not humiliate this family in front of neighbors and friends. Do you understand me?" I laughed bitterly. "Humiliate you? I've done nothing but hold you up. You humiliated yourselves the second you told me I wasn't welcome." Thomas's face reddened. His hand trembled as he waved his phone in the air. "I'll fix this," he growled. "You think anyone will believe you over me? You've always been too intense, too emotional. If I tell people you're unstable, they'll believe it." There it was, the weapon I knew they'd reach for eventually. Make me small, make me suspect, strip me of credibility until my words vanished. I straightened my shoulders. "Do it. Tell them I'm unstable. But don't forget those receipts on the table. Paper doesn't lie. Bank statements don't lie. The tow truck outside didn't lie either." A murmur rippled among the guests again. One man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Another woman clutched her purse tighter, as if afraid the tension might spill onto her. Derek finally broke, desperation dripping from his voice. "You're destroying everything I've built. My career, my reputation. Do you have any idea how fragile the art world is? One post, one rumor, and I'm finished." "You built nothing," I shot back, my voice sharp but steady. "Every opportunity you had was padded with my money. You can't call yourself self-made when someone else footed the bill." He flinched like I'd struck him. For once, there was no witty comeback, no charming grin to smooth it over. Mom lunged in again, her voice trembling but vicious. "You don't understand family, Harper. Families don't keep score. Families forgive. And you've turned into a stranger. Look at you, standing there waving receipts like a prosecutor. Who does that to their own blood?" I felt my throat tighten, but I forced the words out. "Families don't keep score? You're right, families don't. But parasites do. And I'm finished letting you drain me dry under the excuse of blood ties." Gasps broke out around the room. A glass clinked hard against a table as someone set it down too quickly. My father's jaw worked furiously, but the words wouldn't come. Mom's eyes darted around, searching for support, but the guests had already turned, some whispering, some shaking their heads. The illusion of the perfect Ellison family was collapsing in real time, and they knew it. Thomas finally snapped, pointing at the door. "Get out, now. If you walk out that door, don't ever come back." I held his gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. For years, that threat had been the chain around my neck, the fear of being cut off, the terror of exile. But tonight, after everything, it didn't scare me anymore. I let the silence stretch until it ached. Then I said softly, but clear enough for every ear in the room, "I was already gone the second you chose him over me." The words landed heavier than any shout. Mom's lips trembled. Derek's eyes darted to the floor. Dad's fists clenched, powerless. And with that, the balance shifted. They hadn't won. Their strikes had only exposed how hollow their weapons had become. The silence after my father's threat still clung to the walls, heavy as smoke. I could feel every eye on me, measuring, questioning. For a moment, it was just my ragged breath against the hollow pulse in my ears. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out, calm, resonant, impossible to ignore. "That's enough." Heads turned. Guests parted instinctively, and there he was, Judge Henry Whitmore, leaning on his cane, his silver hair catching the glow of the Christmas lights. He wasn't supposed to be here. I'd invited him once, years ago, but he had never come. Tonight, apparently, curiosity had drawn him in. Elaine stiffened. "Judge Whitmore," she gasped, forcing a brittle smile. "We didn't realize—" "You didn't realize I still remember who kept me alive," he interrupted, his gaze never leaving me. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority sharpened by decades in court. The murmurs around the room died instantly. I blinked, stunned. "Judge." He lifted a hand gently, cutting me off. "Let me speak." He turned to the room at large, his eyes sweeping over Derek, my parents, the guests who looked suddenly very small in their holiday finery. "This woman," he said, pointing his cane toward me, "sat by my bed when I was waiting for surgery. The world had decided an old man wasn't worth much time. But she stayed. She explained every risk, every chance, every reason not to give up. When others moved on, she held her ground. And because of that, I am here tonight." Gasps broke out. A few guests exchanged looks, shocked. Someone whispered, "I didn't know she treated him." Thomas's face darkened. "With all respect, Judge, this is a private family matter." "No, Thomas!" Whitmore's voice thundered, cutting him off with the ease of a gavel striking. "You made it a public one the second you invited witnesses into your home and tried to bury the truth in front of them." Elaine's hands fluttered at her necklace. "You don't understand. She exaggerates." "Exaggerates?" His eyes burned now, sharp as the man who'd presided over countless trials. "Do bank statements exaggerate? Do tow trucks fabricate repossessions? Do overdue notices lie?" The questions hung like iron in the air. No one dared answer. Derek shifted, desperate. "Judge, with all due respect—" "Respect?" Whitmore cut in again, his cane thudding once against the hardwood. "Respect is what she gave you. Every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice. And what did she get in return? Locked doors, empty words, lies about being too heavy for Christmas." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. The facade of the Ellison family had already cracked. Whitmore's words shattered it completely. He turned back to me then, his gaze softening. "Harper, you don't need my defense. Your actions speak louder than their accusations ever could. But let it be known, if anyone dares question your stability, your integrity, they'll have to answer to me. And I don't lose battles I know are just." My throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All I could manage was a choked, "Thank you." Whitmore nodded once firmly, before easing back into his chair. The room buzzed with hushed awe, the kind reserved for verdicts no one could appeal. Elaine looked stricken, her mask of control finally dissolving. My father's shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him. Derek's eyes darted helplessly between us, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone. The guests began to gather their coats, murmuring softly to each other. But their glances at me weren't pitying. They were reverent, some even apologetic, as if they'd witnessed something undeniable, a truth long hidden now dragged into the light. As the door opened and the cold night swept in with the departing crowd, I stood a little taller. The Ellison family had tried to strike back, to erase me once more. But now the verdict had been spoken, and it wasn't in their favor. The drive back to Asheville was quieter than the night itself. The highway stretched ahead in endless ribbons of frost, my headlights carving tunnels through the darkness. I kept both hands on the wheel, but my grip wavered. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that made my chest feel too heavy for breath. For the first time since I'd walked into that house, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Had I turned myself into the monster they'd always painted me to be? The whispers of my mother's voice, dramatic, unstable, exaggerating, echoed in my ears, louder than the hum of the tires on asphalt. By the time I reached my apartment, the city was asleep under a quilt of snow. I pushed the door open and was met with silence, broken only by the low hum of the radiator. The bread pudding still sat on the counter, cold and untouched. My suitcase waited where I'd left it, green and hopeful, a reminder of a holiday that never existed. I dropped my coat and sat heavily on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. For a moment, I let the tears come, not the fiery tears of anger, but the slow, reluctant kind that sting because they're honest. I had stood tall in that living room, but here, in the safety of solitude, I let myself be small. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, afraid it was another cruel message, another accusation. But when I glanced at the screen, my breath caught. It was a text from Sienna. "You were right to speak. Don't doubt it. They needed to hear it, and the world needs to hear you too. You're not alone." A second message followed, this one with a photo. Her grandmother, smiling, standing proudly in her kitchen, holding a pan of cookies. The caption read, "Still baking at 82 because of you." My throat tightened again, but this time with something gentler. Gratitude, recognition. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't just some bitter shadow in my family's story. And then, as if the universe knew I needed more, another notification appeared. An email. From Judge Whitmore. "Harper, I meant what I said tonight. Don't let them rewrite your story. If anyone questions your integrity, send them my way. You gave me years I wouldn't have had otherwise, and I intend to use them to defend what's right." I read the words twice, then 3 times, the sharp edges of self-doubt softening with each pass. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. My chest still hurt, but the pain wasn't just grief, it was release too. Like finally tearing off a cast and realizing the limb beneath, though tender, could still hold weight. In the stillness, I whispered to myself, "You're not invisible. Not anymore." The radiator clicked, the snow outside continued to fall, and somewhere deep in my bones I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't known in years. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because I had finally fought at all. Tomorrow, the fallout would continue. My family would spread their stories, spin their webs. But tonight, alone in my apartment with messages of truth glowing on my phone, I chose not to let their voices drown out mine. For once, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like freedom. Winter in North Carolina has a way of softening everything. Branches sag with snow. The world hums quieter, as though holding its breath for something new. Weeks had passed since that Christmas night in Charlotte. The Ellison house still stood, but its image had cracked wide open and everyone knew it. I, meanwhile, was still standing too. Not as scaffolding, not as their shadow, but as myself. The email came on a Thursday morning while I was finishing rounds at the hospital. I paused in the hallway, stethoscope still around my neck, reading the words twice before they sank in. Dr. Harper Ellison has been selected to receive the North Carolina Humanitarian Physician Award, ceremony in Raleigh, March 15th. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I leaned against the wall, breathless. For once, recognition wasn't being stolen by someone else. It had my name, only mine. March came swiftly, and with it the ceremony. The auditorium in Raleigh was filled with doctors, nurses, journalists, even patients whose lives had been touched by the quiet, unseen work people like me did every day. The stage gleamed under soft golden lights. My name was printed in bold across the program. As I walked up the steps, applause rose around me, echoing like a storm I had waited my whole life to hear. The presenter shook my hand, the glass plaque cool and heavy in mine. "Dr. Harper Ellison," he said, smiling, "for service that went unseen for too long." I stepped to the podium. The microphone buzzed faintly as I adjusted it. For a moment, I let the silence settle, the way I had in my parents' living room. Only this time, I wasn't standing alone. I began, voice steady but warm. For most of my life, I thought love had to be earned, that if I gave enough, if I stayed quiet enough, if I sacrificed enough, one day it would come back to me. Tonight, standing here, I know I was wrong. The audience leaned in. "I don't regret the sacrifices. My patients, the elders forgotten by their families, the ones sitting alone in nursing homes, they deserved every ounce of time I gave. But family should never ask you to disappear in order to belong." I paused, scanning the rows of faces, some misty-eyed, others nodding. Recently, I stood in a room full of people who told me I was too much, too heavy, that my work, my very presence, wasn't welcome. And for the first time, I said no. For the first time, I told the truth. My throat tightened, but I pressed on. The truth is this. Love isn't silence. Love isn't erasure. Love is not a transaction you pay into until you collapse. Love is presence. Love is recognition. Love is respect. Without those, it isn't family. It's a cage. The applause that followed shook the air, but I wasn't finished. So if you're listening tonight, and you've ever been made to feel invisible, by blood relatives, by friends, by anyone who demanded your silence to keep their comfort, hear me when I say this. You don't have to stay invisible. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to keep paying to belong. Walk away. Stand tall and write your own story. The crowd surged to its feet. The standing ovation was thunderous, not polite but raw, full of conviction. Cameras flashed. The weight I had carried for years lifted piece by piece until I felt lighter than air. And somewhere in the back of the hall, I thought I saw Sienna standing quietly, phone in hand, recording. She gave me a small nod, the kind that says, "You did it." Later that night, back in my small apartment, I placed the award on my desk beside the framed letter from Sienna's grandmother. I sat there in the quiet, letting it all sink in. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who stayed awake at 2 a.m., wiring money for emergencies, who baked bread pudding every year, hoping it would earn her a seat at the table, who knocked on doors that never opened. That girl thought love was sacrifice. That girl thought family meant carrying everyone else until her own back broke. But I'm not her anymore. What I've learned is this: family isn't defined by blood, but by how we treat each other. Respect, not obligation. Presence, not absence. Real love doesn't demand your silence, it listens. Real love doesn't take endlessly, it gives back. And real love doesn't ask you to disappear, it makes space for you to exist fully. If you've ever felt invisible, let me tell you, you are not too much. You are not a burden. You don't need to earn the right to belong. Step into the light, take up space. That's where your story begins. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Someone you know might need to hear this too.